Thanks, Faye. A pretty dramatic story, and you may think, why did Dennis do that one? By the way, I'm Dennis. If you don't know who I am, I'm filling in for Greta, giving her maternity cover. I'm preaching today. If you haven't figured that out. Why this story? Because it's pretty dramatic, and it would make a great Hollywood story. So what it is I've called this Man Across the Lake, and Mark 4:35 to 5:43, the end of the chapter. It's a snapshot of a day in the life of Jesus. And last time I spoke, it begins in the evening, because Jewish days beginning in the evening, and with Mark 4:35, with Jesus and the disciples on the shores of Lake Tiberias or the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus suggesting they go to the other side. So that's the start of a day in the life of Jesus. So this is included because it's one of the events in the day in the life of Jesus. So crossing to the other side, it had been a horrific night. This is last time I spoke, and we're just recapping here. The disciples were still getting over a storm. They thought they were going to die. We think, nothing of it, but I've done a little bit of sailing, and when you get in some rough weather, the bravest men will pray. I have gone through some rough weather, and it can be pretty daunting. But they went through this storm, and they thought they were going to die. And then Jesus, who was asleep in the back of the boat, they woke him up. He rebuked the storm, and in Greek it just said there was a mega calm. There was just a great calm, and the disciples were aghast. It was like, who is this guy? Because as Jews, they knew the significance of what Jesus had just done. And what it was the question was Yahweh, this is the Old Testament God, was Yahweh in the boat with them? And you know why that is, because there's only one person who's ever done that, and it's Yahweh. Now it's morning. What a night. The tired, you can imagine, they hadn't had much sleep, they were tired. All they wanted to do was just get to the other side and get off that boat. Well, that's what I'd want to do anyway. I just want to get me off the boat. Just give me a bit of space from Jesus. All of a sudden, he's a scary sort of guy. And so in this section, from Mark 35 to the end of chapter 5, it's 4 encounters with Jesus. And so we've got the storm in the lake, and it's a group encounter with Jesus. So disciples as a group encounter him. Then we've got this on the good try for trying to pronounce it. I pronounce it Gerasene. I don't know if that's the right one or not. Oh, right. Okay. Oh, well done. Yeah. I think we butcher some of the Jewish words, don't we? Like, I don't even know if I'm saying it right. So, the Gerasene demoniac is about a person whom Jesus came to. So, a person whom Jesus came to. There's a woman who comes to Jesus. She comes to Jesus by way of an interruption. And then the fourth story is about Jairus, a man who comes to Jesus on behalf of someone else. And Jesus appears to turn up late. So that's where we're going to go. I'm going to take you through those. So these stories, 3 of them have faith elements in them. So the first one, the one we did, the disciples last week, the disciples in a storm had lost sight of Jesus. And Jesus reprimands them for the lack of faith. So that's the faith element. And then you've got the lady who says, if I just touch him, we'll talk about that. And Jairus, where Jesus says, just believe, because his daughter died, and Jesus still hadn't got to him. But this one's different. This story seems to have, there's no sort of, faith doesn't seem to be operative in the story. It's a bit different, just for your interest. So here we have a man, the lake. I've been to Israel. Who's been to Israel? Oh, that's great. Three of us have. The Lake of Galilee, it's the lowest freshwater lake in the world. It's about 200 metres below sea level. And so when you come from the coast, I come from the coast, you come into Tiberias, and there's this hill, and you start going down the steep hill into the lake. And so there's this lake, and it's surrounded by hills. And from one of those hills, a man watched a crowded boat approach the shoreline. He was watching this boat. And the man had a reputation for spooking people, intimidation and violence. Another storm was brewing. The man who met Jesus as he disembarked from the boat was the type of guy Hollywood loves to put in their movies. Creepy and foreboding. You can imagine if we could put some music with this, it would be great. He lived in burial caves, desperately seeking peace in anything associated with death. Few travelled this way because of the man's violence. The authorities had tried to restrain him with chains to his hands and feet, but the reading just said he snapped them. And I used to work with incredibly strong. I used to work with a software engineer who worked in bioengineering. And Elena, you might be able to correct me on this, but he wasn't a believer. And he told me that when your muscles fire, he said it sounds like pins and needles. But say if I move my finger, there's lots of muscles in my finger moving, but they don't fire all at once. It's like these pings, and not all your muscles fire at once. And he was saying, and he wasn't a believer, he said he thinks this guy had all the muscles firing at once. And so he had this incredible strength and snapping chains and manacles on your hands and things like that. That really is Hollywood stuff, isn't it? So he was, he wasn't a nice guy. High anxiety. This guy could find no rest. There was no ease. There was no peace. He was driven relentlessly, seeking relief. Seeking, and never able to find rest, or just high anxiety. In pain, he would cut himself to feel. People do that nowadays. People, when they're in great pain, they cut themselves to get a sense of reality. Well, this guy was a cutter, just to bring a sense of reality. And there would be lapses in his torment, then it would all kick in again. And the hills echoed with his howls. So he was a spooky guy. And the other thing about him was he was isolated. People had tried to help him, but his unpredictability made him dangerous, and people got hurt. People avoided the man and left him to himself. The reality was there was very little hope for this guy. He was hopeless. What do? Just leave him there in the hills, just let him howl, and just don't go there. Just one of those guys. And the man watched as 13 men disembarked from a boat. You can imagine him watching. And Mark 5:6, he says, when Jesus was still some distance away, the man saw him. He ran to meet him and bowed low before him. The man was going to have some fun. He bowed, greeting the men in mock honour. The game, this was a game to be savoured. And with a shriek, he screamed. Unexpected, a confrontation of goodness, overwhelming power, and the man's own powerlessness. What were the demons seeing? Jesus' presence seemed to wind up darkness. The first time in Mark was in Capernaum, Jesus' home base, in a synagogue of all places. Like, if we had to get an equivalent for a synagogue, it would be like church. In a church, as he was teaching, in Mark 1 verse 23, it just says, suddenly a man in the synagogue who was possessed by an unclean spirit. The Bible translates these spirits as evil. They weren't evil, they were unclean. The word is unclean. The word evil is not in the New Testament. We've Hollywoodized and made it more dramatic. They were unclean spirits. And the spirit cried out, "Why are you interfering with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus reprimanded him, "Be quiet and come out of the man. I know who you are, the Holy One of God." The Holy One of God. Who is he talking about? And I was just thinking, can we pull back the curtain and say what is going on here? The Bible gives no explanation for what demons are. The Jews knew about demons because Jesus mentions the Exodus, and Jesus was getting a hard time from the Pharisees. And in Luke 11:9, he just says, what about your Exodus? They cast out demons too. They'll be your judges. So they had what they call exorcists for demons as well. They knew about them. From my experience, the Jews, no one really, they thought, one of the speculative things the Jews thought, they thought they were the Nephilim of Genesis 6. There's these giants. Genesis, I won't go there, but just Genesis 6. But from my experience, they are manifestations of death. Why did the man wander among the burial caves? Just death. Death was released into humanity when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in Genesis 3 verse 1 to 7. Just says there, if you eat of its fruit, you are sure to die. And death, you're sure to die, but death is more than physical death. Death is also a power. A power is released into the human race, and it's the greatest power opposed to God. You find in 1 Corinthians 15:26, just says there, and Paul's talking about death and things like that. He said the last enemy to be destroyed is death. So that'll be the last thing that Jesus is a victor over, is death. Adam's disobedience to God's command legitimized death's reign in humanity. So it released this power to humanity, and the way Paul talks about it, it's like a rain, and so death holds humanity in its grip. The end of death's reign was signalled at Jesus' death on the cross and will be fully realised after our resurrection. We will die, but our resurrection will be the final defeat of death. The demons seem to be personalised, and only once in the Old Testament does death become personalised. Only once. Not long after Adam and Eve's exile from the garden, we get a glimpse of an animal, kind of cat-like creature seeking to take out Cain. And just as Genesis 4 verse 7 just says, he was thinking about doing damage to his brother, And God just says to Cain, he said, if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master. And that's this cat-like creature. Wanted to take out Cain, and we know the rest of the story. But not until we get to Jesus do we again encounter demons. So they were there, but Jesus had this direct encounter with them. Demons are credited with causing speech impediments, bent spines, paralysis, sickness, deafness, dumbness, personality disorders, rage. They cause antisocial behaviour and self-destructive behaviour. So back to Mark. With a shriek, he screamed, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had already said to the spirit, "Come out of the man, you spirit." So we're still behind the curtain. What were the demons seeing? What were they seeing in Jesus? In the previous storm, Jesus appears as Yahweh, the Creator, Yahweh. The demons refer to Jesus as Son of the Most High God. Are we seeing another aspect of Jesus' identity? Because in Mark, you find that Jesus' identity is hidden in Mark and it's slowly revealed. This is another aspect of Jesus' identity being revealed. I think the demons are encountering a human as God intended a human to be. That's what I think. The Adam. Paul refers to Jesus as the Adam. We call him just Adam, but in the Greek it's called the Adam. The man who confronts death. 1 Corinthians 15:21 says, there's just one verse out of a whole lot. It says, so you see, just as death came into the world through a man, the first Adam released death into the world. Now the resurrection from the dead has begun through another man. That man's Jesus. So one man brought death into the world. Through another man, the resurrection of the dead has begun. So the way it talks about it continues. Both Paul in both Romans 5 and 1 Corinthians 15, because that's where he talks about the Adam man, repeats himself to get the point across. So when you read Romans is a difficult book to read. It seems like Paul keeps on repeating himself and to try, and it's like he's saying the same thing again in a different way. What that implies that Jesus as the second Adam was critical to how Paul saw humanity's connection with Jesus. So Paul saw Jesus himself carried a consciousness that he was all humanity in one person. In the title Son of Man. And I've explained it before, but the Son of Man just means the Son of humanity. I believe Jesus saw himself as the Adam man. And where the Old Testament does not give, in the Old Testament, God does not give birth to a son. You know, you look through there and you can't, we find Jesus the Son of God. You'll be struggling to find anywhere where it talks about God giving birth. But Luke's genealogy, in Luke 3, it just ends in this genealogy. Seth was the son of Adam. Adam was the son of God. Adam, the first Adam, was the son of God. And Jesus, as the Adam man, the second Adam, is the son of God. Now, I know this is a bit controversial, but you won't find anything in the Old Testament about God giving birth in that sense. So on the Mount of Transfiguration, the Mount of Transfiguration where there was Peter, James and John, and Jesus went up this mount mountain, and he started to pray, and all of a sudden he started to change, and Moses and Elijah appeared. In Luke 9:29 it says, "And as he was praying, the appearance of his face was transformed, and his clothes became dazzling white." What do you think Peter, James, and John were seeing? Does anybody want to have a guess? Or have I totally lost you? I'll put you out of your misery. I think what they were seeing a man as God intended a man. I think when they were seeing Jesus with his face shining like lightning, and they were seeing what God had envisaged for humanity before the fall. Jesus, it's a glorified man you're seeing, but you're seeing a man as God intended man. So the Adam, Jesus as he is, I believe this is what the demons were apprehending when they looked at Jesus. When they saw him, they were seeing what the other guys saw on the Mount of Transfiguration. They were seeing a human being without sin as God intended a human being to be. They saw Jesus' humanity as it should have been before death entered the garden. They saw the Adam, the Son of God. Jesus, you're the Adam, Son of the Most High God, the Holy One of God. If Jesus, the Adam man, represented the human race, death had stolen his descendants' inheritance. So as Adam, the death had come along and says, and the great plan God had for Adam, death had stolen it. There was no inheritance. Jesus as the Adam had a score to settle. Judgment was legitimate and coming. That's why they were in fear. In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me. For Jesus had already said to the spirit, "Come out of the man, you evil spirit." Then Jesus demanded, "What is your name?" When Jesus asked the name of the unclean spirits, they responded, "Legion." A legion, roughly 6,000 Roman soldiers. It was indicative of number inhabiting the man. The Message Bible just says mob. I have found that untimely death sometimes leaves a shadow, a legacy of death. As a minister, I've had to deal with ghosts. So I'm not freaking out here. When I was I'll give a story, when I was at Waitara Church, we had the Methodist Church. One Friday night, I was just finishing my sermon around at 5. This lady turns up and she said, "Are you the Methodist minister?" I said, "No, I'm not. I'm a Presbyterian minister." And I said, "But I can help you." And I said, "What do you want?" And she said, "In my house," she said, we're in the house, we have, there's a presence there." And she pulls down this sort of a shirt and says, "Look, I've got black marks here where I've been tried to be beaten up, and the kids are having nightmares and things like that." And I thought, I've never had this before. So I said, "Look, Jim, just give me a couple of minutes, let me finish and I'll come round." It was at the Methodist Manse, the old Methodist Manse. And what had happened was this lady was a Cook Islander, and I went in there and I thought, never done this before. So I took some oil with me, and I just said, "Well, what's going on here?" She said, "What happened was the place was rented, and the guy who had the place, he drowned at Fitzroy Beach." And so went in there, and so I've rented the place since. So went through the place, and I just got some oil, put it over the door posts, anointed it, and prayed through the place. I didn't really know what I was doing, and I came to this bedroom, and it was quite cold, and it had this funny smell. And I said, "What's here?" And she said, "Oh, this is where the man used to sleep." And so I just prayed. I don't know, I can't remember what I prayed, but I prayed that the blood of Jesus would cleanse it, all that sort of stuff. I did everything. and that was it. Later on, I got rung up by the Baptist minister. And so he said, "Oh, can you go to this place? There's a lady having some trouble there." So I rang up the number, and it was the lady. And I rang up and said, "Look, I've just been given your number. And she said, oh no, you're the guy that came round. I said, oh, okay. She said, it's all gone. And so it was a presence left by someone who drowned. And I actually, since that time, I've had several other occasions where there's an untimely death leaves a presence. And you know, it's just, I think that's what they are. And so what we get is the demons, where are we? I lost my place. Is it possible that what inhabited the man was the shadow of a Roman military massacre? Around the area, there was a lot of death down the coast. I think there was 2,000 crosses down the coast of Tyre, which is the coast near there, where Alexander the Great had crucified people. There was a lot of death and massacres. There was ghosts there. Like during the week, I was reading about the Colosseum. People sleep in the Colosseum, and they say you sleep in the Colosseum, and the place is haunted. And you hear gladiators and things like that. Not trying to spook you, but these are legacies of untimely deaths. So it could have been that. But the pigs, the demons, where are we? The demons fled to a herd of pigs, and about 2,000 pigs ran down a steep hillside and drowned in the water. Pigs were unclean for Jews, but pigs were the staple diet of the Roman army. So Jesus probably did the Jews a favour. And the herdsmen fled to a nearby town and the surrounding countryside, spreading the news as they ran. People rushed out to see what had happened. A crowd soon gathered around Jesus, and they saw the man who had been possessed by the demons. He was sitting there fully clothed and perfectly sane, and they were all afraid. A man sitting at rest, no longer in high anxiety, fully clothed. He had his dignity back. Other accounts had this man used to run around the hills naked, perfectly sane. His mind was restored. He could think straight, and they were afraid. Jesus had done what no one else was able to do. This man was hopeless, and Jesus gave him hope. And you know, I was thinking, what does this man represent? The man represents me. The man represents humanity. You know, at rest, sitting, no anxiety, at rest. Before, a man who day and night had wandered among the burial caves in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. A man who could not sit still, no rest, no peace, now sitting with Jesus at rest, peace, and rest, peace, and stillness are elusive. You know, our society is marked by anxiety. I read somewhere on the net that the biggest consumption of pills are going to be for anxiety and depression. You know, because we just can't rest. I remember in the hippie movement. Remember the hippie movement? It was probably a little bit before my time, but they used to go, peace, man. You know, it was always about peace. They were into psychedelic drugs and even drugs like marijuana and even booze. It gives you a measure of peace. Not that I've tried the drugs. So I remember when I was, years ago, there used to be this thing called Nambassa. It was a kind of a rock festival, a pretty wild thing. And they used to have a Christian tent in it. And so I went along. I was part of they call it the Agape team, and we had this big Christian tent. And my job at that time was to look, we were giving away watermelons on this front desk, and this big Māori guy comes along, and they were playing, at the time you get these things called praise albums. They were just this really cool Christian music. It was trendy at the time. And he goes, hey man, he says, where can I get that music? And I said, why? He says, oh, it calms the beast in me. It was just the presence. And then I remember another time we gave out lots of these newspapers and we shared our faith with people. It was just so confrontational. There was this girl, I remember I mentioned the word Jesus to her, and she flew into a rage and she said, I've worked so hard to get that peace, and that name just destroyed it. You see, peace is elusive. And it's what we want, we can't get. And even as a Christian, I struggle sometimes with anxiety. I have anxiety, and we have to learn how to deal with anxiety. And Jesus says, he said, take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I'm humble and gentle of heart, and you will find rest for your souls. You see, Jesus is the one that can deal to our anxiety. He can give us peace. As before he left, and John just says, I'm leaving you with a gift, peace of mind and heart. And the peace I give is a gift the world cannot give. So don't be troubled, don't be afraid. So Jesus gives us peace. This man was sitting at Jesus' feet. The next thing was no shame. He was fully clothed. You know, I was just thinking about fully clothed and no clothed. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were naked and they felt no shame. But once they'd sinned, they felt shame and they covered themselves. You see, no clothes means that the guy, it's symbolic, he had shame. And so in the West, people talk about guilt, you know, but the thing is, there's two things. There's guilt and shame. Guilt is when you've violated someone else. So if I went to the warehouse and I shoplifted, I'd feel guilt because I'd violated the warehouse, but I'd feel shame because I am better than that, because I'd violated myself. Shame is when you violate your own internal nobility. God's made us as noble creatures, and shame is when we violate that. So, you know, like when lying, if I lie, I've violated someone else because I treat them less than what they are, but I've violated myself because I'm better than that. The worst one is sexual sin. There's terrible shame associated with sexual sin. You know, like I used to know a guy, his name was Weston Finley, who was the pastor at Thames Elam. He had a whole lot of guys that came to the Lord, and the guys used to say, you know, one of the good things about becoming a Christian, he said, on Saturday nights we used to get drunk, and then we used to wake up in the morning and there was a strange woman in our beds. He said, you know, the worst thing about that was the shame we felt. And we don't have to feel that shame now because Jesus took it on the cross. But you know, it's just with shame, God says, you can do better than that. You don't have to live like this. You're a noble creature. And so we find that Jesus took the things we do deeply regret on the cross. He took our shame. And so we don't have to feel like that anymore. You know, and with shame, you can't talk about it. If you talk about it, it just goes deeper and makes you feel worse. But Jesus took our shame on the cross. You know, he knew about humiliation. He was crucified naked. But shame is even worse than that. Shame cuts deep, and he took it. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone, a new life has begun. You know, the past is gone, you can be new. That's what the cross does for us. The last thing he says, being of sound mind. A man who we would class as insane before now had his mind back. Paul just says to Timothy, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and a sound mind. So his sanity came back. Jesus helped us to be human, to be what we were meant to be sons of God. Jesus was the most human person there ever was. Sin dehumanizes us. The cross helps us to become human again. And so Jesus helps us to be human sons of God. You know, on this, Mark 5:7 it says, and they were all afraid. Then those who had seen what had happened told the others about the demon-possessed man and the pigs, and the crowd began pleading with Jesus to go away and lead them. You see, if Jesus' mission was to teach and preach to the crowds, his mission was a failure on this one. The crowds didn't want him there because they saw a man who had terrorized them sitting sane and clothed with Jesus. The reaction is a reflection of the man's previous condition. You know, when Jesus says, we go to the other side, he doesn't mention the word lake. Maybe Jesus did go to the other side, into the darkness, a storm and a confrontation with a legion of demons. You know, it was one by one. For one man, it was worth it. It was one by one. The Father knew that Jesus crossed the lake for one man who desperately needed only what he could do. A man found his soul at peace, no shame, of sound mind. No longer an animal, a human, a son of God. You see, Jesus crossed the lake for one man. Jesus approached the darkness for one person. He crossed to the other side out of his comfort zone into danger, not to see great success, but for you. Because you're the man. I'm the man. But he crossed the lake for us. It's one by one. That's how he reaches us one by one by one. He crosses the lake so that people like the man, you and me, might find rest, dignity, and sanity. It's serious stuff. It's what the world needs. It's what the world wants. And Jesus gives it. Rest, dignity, and sanity. He will cross the lake for you. He'll cross into the darkness for you. He will face the storm for you. He did it for a desperate, hopeless, lonely man. He will do it for you. See, the man is me, the man is you. What we're going to do now is we're going to have communion. And in communion, the communion is at the cross, and the cross is where our shame, where our failure, it's where our sickness, where we can offload everything we are onto the cross. And that's why we celebrate it, because it does something. It's powerful. And you know, it's not just for people that have never met Jesus. It'd be great if there's people like that here. I doubt there's anybody who hasn't met Jesus here. But even as Christians, you know, we carry all this stuff that we were never meant to carry. We were never designed to carry sin and death. And that's what, you know, we get sick with it and all sorts of things. But we were made to be like that man on the Mount of Transfiguration. That's how God sees us, as sons of God. So this morning I'm just going to break bread, and as you have the cup and the wine, let's just think about, it's the cross. It's really that the bread and the wine is a reenactment of the cross. As we partake, if there's anything where, you know, so I'm carrying stuff I shouldn't carry, and only you know what that is, just say, God, take it. Just do something. And as you take the bread and wine, you're partaking of the cross, and just allow God to do what only God can do, only what Jesus can do. And it makes us better people. It turns us into better human beings, to be humans like we're supposed to be. So we'll just go through it.